This is part 3 of our section on Chinese religion. The section is called The Three Teachings. We're going to take a look at the way Buddhism, Daoism, and Confucianism work together in Chinese religion. This is where I think Asian religions start to get very interesting. Is we'll in the next couple of weeks, we're going to have a chance to look at several countries, including China, Japan, Thailand, some other places, where people practice kind of a combination of foreign religions, such as Confucianism, which gets exported to other countries, Hinduism, which gets exported, Buddhism gets exported. All these religions start moving around Asia, and they interact with local religions. And as some people have pointed out already, you start to see that different countries, different cultures start developing their own versions of Buddhism, their own versions of what their national religions are. And it starts to blur the lines, right, between these different traditions. And this is something that Asian practitioners are just very comfortable with, right? There's not a need to label oneself and say, I believe in this God, therefore I am this religion. No, there's not that need there. And in fact, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are quite unique in that sense, in terms of other religions around the world, in comparison to other religions around the world. So this is where things get, I think, really interesting, and I think you're going to enjoy the coming lessons. So here I've included four symbols actually, for 3 traditions. Here you'll remember the Dharma wheel, which is a symbol of Buddhism. Here is the yin yang, which is the symbol of Daoism. And then here are 2 symbols. They're both Chinese words, and both are sometimes used to represent Confucianism. Confucianism doesn't really have a symbol, strictly speaking. Sometimes this symbol, this word, which is the word for scholar, is used to represent Confucianism. This is the word for water. Sometimes that's used to represent Confucianism. But again, there's no set symbol where there is for Daoism and Buddhism. I think that's interesting. I'm not sure what it says about Confucianism as a tradition, but I thought it was quite interesting. And of course, we have this picture again, a Chinese man with his incense. And who's he giving the incense to? We don't know. It could be Tao. He could be at a Taoist temple. He could be at a Buddhist temple. He could be at a Confucian temple. We're going to look at some other temples in this lesson that include elements of all 3 traditions, right, and can't strictly be defined as Buddhist or Taoist or Confucian. Rather, they're Chinese. They're Chinese temples. So the timeline, just going to glance at it one more time. Right, so we had Confucianism and Daoism kind of making their way at the same time. We had early Chinese religion, which is quite ancient, included ancestor offerings and divination and things like that. Right, and here's when Buddhism comes in, and Buddhism kind of complicates things because it's a foreign influence, right? And by the Song dynasty, Zuxi and some other important Chinese thinkers come in, and they start saying, no, Buddhism is not Chinese. Confucianism is Chinese, and we need to get back to Confucianism. Confucianism is where it's at. And we're going to kind of look at the way these different traditions have ebbed and flowed. So these are the 3 patriarchs. We have 3 teachings, 3 traditions, 3 patriarchs. There is Buddha. There is, you recognize that, right? That's the yin-yang and the I Ching. So that's Lao Tzu, who wrote the Tao Te Ching. And then that is Confucius, right? So the 3 patriarchs. And they're commonly shown together, right? They're commonly shown side by side. Not as rivals, but as equals. Even though, from a Buddhist point of view, these 2 aren't enlightened beings per se, but still in Chinese mind, they're all patriarchs. They're father figures. They're father figures of Chinese thought. And so they go side by side. So how do these three traditions work together? That is the question. Confucianism, in many ways, has acted as a political ideology and a social value system. So I was talking to my husband last night, and we were talking about Confucianism, and he was saying it makes sense that the emperors of China adopted Confucianism. It makes perfect sense, because Confucianism as a philosophy or a religion, however you want to take it, makes perfect sense. It teaches people to respect authority and to know their duty towards authority, right? It creates an order, and that's what you need in a large empire. You need order. Confucianism also, teaches ethics. It's an ethical system. Daoism is very much an outlook on the world, a way the world works. It's a system of gods and magic. It's not necessarily a judgmental system in terms of what is right and what is wrong. It's more just interested in the way things work, right, in terms of qi and other kinds of energy and learning how to go with the flow. And then Buddhism comes in, and it kind of changed things, right? Because as we talked about, Confucianism and Daoism were kind of worldly traditions. They weren't interested in getting out of the world, right? If you had said, before Buddhism entered China, if you had said, how are you going to get out of the world? A Chinese person would have said, where are you going to go? Right? There wasn't a sense of getting out of here. There's just this, right? There's just this. And then Buddhism comes in, and it says, no, there's something else. This is illusion. There's something else. We have to get out. So Buddhism becomes a soteriology. Soteriology is a word that's commonly used to talk about Christian theology. It means the theory of being saved, of saving your soul. Buddhism comes in, and it is interested in protecting the soul and saving it from the world of illusion and breaking out of reincarnation. Now, of course, in Daoism and Confucianism, they didn't originally believe in reincarnation. They believed in an afterlife. And that most people would go to an afterlife that was just kind of blah. Really, the Chinese afterlife is kind of blah. Nothing. It's not like a paradise. It's not like a place where you go to live with the gods. You can be reunited with your family, but for the most part, how you fare depends upon whether or not your living descendants give you offerings, right, so that you can have a good existence in the afterlife. If you want money, food, things in the afterlife, you need your descendants to send you offerings, and in return, the ancestors will send blessings back. So that was the Taoist Confucius way of looking at it. So Buddhism comes in and has a very different way of looking at things, and in some ways Buddhism kind of fit pretty well with Confucianism and Daoism, and in some ways it clashed. One of the main ways is this idea of whether or not this world is all there is, right? How do you relate to the world? Is the world something that you need to back off of? Is it something that you need to get out of? Is it real? Right? Buddhism has this idea of emptiness. Confucians did not like that idea. Confucianism did not like the idea of emptiness, especially Neo-Confucianism. Did not like that idea. It said, how can there be emptiness? Of course there are things, there are virtues, and there are relationships, and there's a world, and you have to relate to the world correctly. You can't say the world is empty. Confucianism was concerned that Buddhism, as a foreign influence, was nihilistic, right? It was teaching that everything is nothing, and therefore, if everything is nothing, then nothing matters. That was the problem Confucianism had with Buddhism. And sometimes, during certain parts of history, Confucianism had the same problem with Taoism. It didn't always all get along. Certain times they got along well, and other times they didn't. And whether or not they got along had a lot to do with how they developed. So how do they intertwine? Taoism definitely influenced Buddhism in China to create Chan Buddhism, which went over to Japan and became Zen Buddhism, right? Because Taoism definitely had this idea of the oneness of all things. Chinese Buddhists definitely understood the concept of the oneness of all things. And this is what happens when a foreign religion enters a new country. The new country, that the people in the new place already have a worldview. They already have a way of looking at things. So now they receive this new tradition. They receive Buddhism. And how do they understand it? Well, they're going to understand it from their own worldview. And from a Chinese point of view, the oneness of all things makes perfect sense. Makes perfect sense. That's exactly what Daoism is, right? Qi and everything. Everything's made of qi. And everything is in harmony. Everything needs to be in harmony, right? And Chan Buddhism comes out of this kind of Taoist Buddhist perspective, that there's oneness, that we need to practice detachment for the sake of scholarly pursuits. Remember, this is a Confucian society. Education is very important. The idea of action without ego fits into the Taoist idea of wu wei, actionless action, acting in a way where you're just kind of going with the flow of things. You're not fighting things. You're going with the flow. And also the Taoist characteristic of being totally absorbed into your practice and your lifestyle, right? For a lot of Taoists, kind of the elite Taoists, were interested in inner alchemy and these kinds of things. The path of Taoism was something you had to live. So you take Buddhism and they made a Buddhism you have to live, and it focuses on the oneness of all things and focuses on study and meditation and conquering the mind. These are very Chinese ideas. This is where Chan Buddhism comes from, which became Zen Buddhism in Japan. And next week we're going to look at Shinto, which is Japanese religion, and we're going to go back to Zen Buddhism again. We're going to say, okay, so we've seen how Taoism and Buddhism made Chan Buddhism, and then Chan Buddhism goes over to Japan and mixes with Shinto and becomes Zen Buddhism, which is kind of the same as Chan, but Zen Buddhism in Japan definitely has like a very Japanese flavor to it as well. It's quite interesting, right? So in addition, Taoism does kind of have an idea of have a goal of ultimate realization. It's similar to nirvana. It's similar to enlightenment, right? You have the idea of inner alchemy and secret teachings and learning to understand the universe. And if you can understand the universe, right, then you can kind of conquer it. You can conquer yourself, and you can become immortal. Your soul can become immortal. Which is similar in some ways as the idea of nirvana, right? Another way that Buddhism impacted Daoism, Confucianism, is that Buddhism forced Taoism to define and structure itself further. The same thing happened in India. The influx of Islam, Zoroastrianism, Buddhism, Christianity, every time Hinduism encountered a new religion, the Hindus had to stop and say, wait, how do we define ourselves? How are we different from this? Why do we remain with our tradition and not, go over to another tradition? And that is the case, I will say. That's not just the case with religion. That's the case with all ideologies. If you yourself are at a party and you encounter someone with a different political ideology than you, they say, hey, I believe in, communism, socialism, Republican Party, Democratic Party, whatever it is, and if that's not your thing, then you have to kind of step back and justify yourself and say, well, wait, what I believe is, and this is why. That's what happens when different ideas meet. And this is what happens when different religions meet, right? So Taoism has to define and structure itself further. And Taoism also adopts the whole, the monastic community aspect as well. Daoism had hermits, and Daoism had priests, and Daoism had different kinds of followers, people who were trying to live according to the principles of Daoism. Buddhism comes in and has this fascinating idea of a monastic community where everyone is living together, trying to live these principles. So Buddhism had an impact on Daoism, and Daoism had an impact on Buddhism. Interestingly enough, Buddhist translations into Chinese often use Taoist vocabulary. When you study religion, they talk a lot about language and the importance of language, right? Language is symbols. Symbols for the ineffable. Symbols for the intangible, for the unseen reality, how to describe it. And Buddhism came in, and it was still in Sanskrit. The Buddhist teachings were still in Sanskrit. And Pali, of course, the Pali canon. And translating into Chinese, the only language the Chinese had to describe these complex ideas of heaven and gods and enlightenment, all these things, were Taoist words. So Buddhist translations, Buddhist text translations into Chinese often use Taoist language, which is very interesting. Of course, Confucianism and Daoism work together, complement each other pretty well. Daoism doesn't really emphasize morals and ethics so much. Confucianism fills that role, and in return, Confucianism encourages people to practice religion, which is Daoism, right? In China, that means practicing Daoism. So the two kind of, for a long time, fit together pretty well. As I say, Neo-Confucianism kind of viewed Buddhism as nihilistic, and there were a good deal of, there have been Confucian scholars over the year who've even argued that Daoism can be dangerous because it is amoral, right? It doesn't emphasize morals and ethics. And therefore Confucianism, really what Neo-Confucianists were saying was that Neo-Confucianism, or Confucianism, was very, very important to any society, more important even than Taoism or Buddhism. And again, it's all Buddhism is nihilistic because it had this idea of emptiness, which is nothingness, right? That's what nihilism is. It means you believe in nothing. So there's definitely, there are places where they harmonize, and there are places where they disagree. And throughout history, each kind of rose and fell in popularity. Confucianism was really popular from about, Neo-Confucianism was really popular from about 1100 to, I'm going to say 1500. It was a major train of thought. Before that, it had been Buddhism. Before that, it had been Daoism. And for a while before that, it was Confucianism. So that's what happens, right? Over thousands and thousands of years, all these changes happen. This is a painting called Early Spring. I brought this in because this is probably one of the most famous Chinese paintings in Chinese history. If you ever take any class on non-Western art, on Asian art, and non-Western art, you're going to see this painting. It's became a model for a lot of other paintings, and in fact, for a couple hundred years after the painter Guo Xi, after he painted it, many painters just tried to copy it and the perfection they saw in it. And and one of the reasons why it was so popular is because it was a powerful symbol for the Chinese of their way of looking at the universe. So let's take a look at this. There are both Taoist and Confucian and even some Buddhist principles in here. So we have a mountain, right? This became the standard for Chinese paintings for a long time, this mountain. Why a mountain? Because it reflected that pyramid schema of society, right? Up here you have kind of the loftiest part that represents the emperor in secular society, or heaven in the spiritual realm, right? And as we go down and down and down and down, you get to the bottom, you see little tiny people. This is so popular in Chinese painting. These huge mountains with these little tiny people at the bottom, that's us. Right? Whether it's because you're a peasant or whether because you're just a human being and not a god, right? This is the way the universe kind of looks. And also because in Taoism, nature is considered has a spiritual aspect, right? Remember, the mountain has a spirit of a dragon in it in feng shui. So this is the dragon here. And everything, the way these paintings are done, they're very much in balance, and there's very much a sense of peacefulness and of all these different plants and animals living together. You'll see little birds, you'll see animals, you'll see a waterfall, you'll see people. Everything has a place, and it's perfectly balanced. The composition is perfectly balanced. And this is the ideal world for the Chinese, and also for the Japanese and the Koreans. There's some poetry up here. The Chinese love poetry. So there's both a Confucian and a Taoist principle here, and the fog, the mistiness, represents kind of like secrets, so things that are hidden from us, right? And both Daoism and Buddhism emphasize secret learnings, secret teachings that the high-minded could learn to find enlightenment or to find immortality. So that it might look like a very simple painting to you, but in fact it's a very complex painting. And as I say, it's a very famous one. It's one of my favorites. Okay, moving on. So these are some temples. We're going to start looking at some temples now. I apologize for the watermark on this, but it was the best picture I could find of this. What do we have here? We have the Dharma wheel with this swastika, right next to the yin yang on top of a temple, right next to the dragons, which are Taoist. And you'll notice that each symbol is on a little cloud. So the Chinese are really comfortable with that. It's Buddhism, it's Daoism, right? Down here we'll see the teachers. Look, see, there's the Buddha, who's right next to him. Confucius, right next to him. Where else would he go? Here is a Buddhist temple. It's definitely a Buddhist temple because Buddha is front and center, and you have the 100 Buddhas behind him. Chinese Buddhism loves the idea of the 100 Buddhas, who are not actually exactly 100 Buddhas. They're just a multitude of Buddhas. They're all the people who have found Buddhahood and exist. But they call them the 100 Buddhas, right? So we have this Shakyamuni Buddha in the middle. You have 100 Buddhas, but look, they're surrounded by Taoist symbols of dragons and things like that, right? Because even the dragons respect the Buddha. This is the Hanging Temple. This is in the mountains of China. I really want to go here someday. You can see it's built right into the mountainside. For a long time it was a monastery. I don't believe any monks live there now because the monastic communities haven't really survived much in modern China under the communist regime. But it is full of all of these different rooms. You can see there are all of these different rooms and levels, and they're all like different places of worship. And here is a room with Confucius. Here's another Confucius. He's in front of a screen. Here's Buddha. Right here is what I'm going to say is the Bodhisattva of compassion. Right, but they're surrounded. Look, they're surrounded by Taoist figures. Here's a Taoist guardian. Here's a ancient Chinese warrior who likely, I don't know this for sure, but from what I know of Chinese religion, likely he was, a mythical character who studied Daoism and just found its secrets and found immortality, and now, he attends the Buddha. Or that might also be a bodhisattva, I'm not sure. So it's all mixed together. It's all just religion, right? It's just like with Hinduism. Hindus didn't have a name for themselves. It was just religion. This is just religion. These are just all great people that you can learn from. This is Datsu. These rock carvings were made in the Tang Dynasty, which had been between 600 CE and 1000 CE, just to say 680 and 1000 AD, so about 1,000 years ago. It's very common in most cultures for the rich and the powerful to invest money in building places of worship. In Europe, the rich built giant cathedrals, right? In China, they built a lot of temples and huge statues into caves and mountains. Why mountains and caves? Daoism. These are places of spirit. These are spiritual places, right? So here again we see the three teachers, the three patriarchs. We have, let's see, Buddha, Confucius, and Lao Tzu. And then you see a lot of kind of Tantric Buddhism or kind of Tibetan Buddhist influence, which I thought was very interesting. Remember this guy and the wheel, right? But there's some Chinese elements here. Look at all the Buddhas coming from the Buddha in the center, right? The 100 Buddhas that emanate from the Shakyamuni Buddha. And then you'll see very Chinese characters like Chinese immortals attending the Buddha. Very interestingly here, and I had never seen this before, and as a part of the Buddha story, this is near the end of the caves, or near the end of kind of his life story. This is the Buddha paying homage to his parents. This is not a part of the original story of the Buddha. Well, why are they doing that? Think about that. They're showing the Buddha comes to the end of his life, but before he goes to highest nirvana, he stops and he pays homage to his parents for raising him and for taking care of him so that he could achieve what he achieved. It's Confucianism. That's pure Confucianism. Confucianism is all about filial piety, right? We talked about filial piety. It's all about respect for your elders and respect for your parents. The Buddha can't just go on to nirvana without stopping to recognize his parents. Can't happen. So this is a very interesting touch to these rock carvings. Another place I would love to visit someday. And if you Google Chinese art, or if you Google Chinese Buddhist statues, you'll see that they have these all over China. Emperors and kings and powerful people build giant statues into caves and mountains all over China, and they're quite spectacular, right? It's pretty interesting. So. I've posted a little video on the course website in the same folder that you found this lecture. It is a PBS video on a Buddhist ash internment. It is a Chinese community living somewhere in America. Can't remember where exactly. It is specifically a Chinese Buddhist community. And they are, it shows these Buddhists all attending this ash internment. So normally when Buddhists die, they will often cremate the remains, and the ashes will do different things. But sometimes you take the ashes home. In China, in this video, you're going to see they have this huge wall with all of these little, they almost look like safety deposit boxes, with all these little cubbies with doors on them. And every family, has a place to put their family members' ashes. They have their ashes in little urns, and they put them in the wall, and then they close it up, and then they pay their respects. What is so fascinating about this is that if you watch it carefully, you're going to see aspects of Buddhism, Confucianism, and Daoism in this Buddhist ash internment. And it is a Buddhist internment. I'm not when I do this, I'm not trying to be sarcastic. It is definitely Buddhist, but it is definitely Chinese Buddhist. There's definitely Confucianism and Daoism. So, what are the different aspects you're going to see as you watch this video, right? So the Buddhism, you're going to see the ceremony of cremation. It is in fact a Pure Land Buddhist sect. You remember the Pure Land, right? If you pray or you chant Amitabha, then you can go to the Pure Land and find enlightenment there. So it's very Buddhist. They'll be chanting, right, for the Buddha. They talk about merit, about doing the chanting in order to gain merit for their loved ones. Concept of rebirth, trying to get their family members a better rebirth, better reincarnation. The Confucianism you're going to see is this idea of filial responsibility, and the narrator even uses this word, filial responsibility, in the beginning of the video, which is very interesting to me, right? So there's this idea that as your parents' children, you have a responsibility to help your ancestors and help them gain merit and help them gain a better rebirth. That's your responsibility. That's not just on them and their life. You have a responsibility to try and help them in the next world, right? If it was a Taoist funerary ceremony, then it would not, it wouldn't be about trying to get them a better rebirth. It would be about getting them, more stuff in the afterlife. But it's Buddhist. So they're not going to, the Chinese don't give up this part. You're still trying to help your ancestors in the next world, right? That doesn't go away just because you're Buddhist. Rather, you're trying to help them gain merit and have a better rebirth. One thing I don't think I've mentioned before is that some Buddhists believe that you are not immediately reincarnated after your death, that there is kind of a grace period of a week or sometimes 40 days. It depends upon the tradition before you are reincarnated. So some Buddhists have ceremonies, right, to recognize that the soul has finally been released and the soul is finally, going on to the next reincarnation. That's a lot of what Tibetan funerary rites are about, right? They have very special funeral rites where they're actually trying to guide their families' souls through kind of this confusing maze that will help, of illusions and things. And if you help your family through it, your family members through it, then they'll reach a better reincarnation. That's not what's happening here. That's what they do in Tibet. This is China. But still, there's this idea that you can get merit for your family, right? By and help them get to the Pure Land, right? You're still trying to help them get to the Pure Land. The other Confucianist part is you will see people at the end of the video bowing with their heads to the ground, getting on their hands and knees and putting their heads to the ground. This is one of the li that we talked about, one of the ceremonies, one of the rites that show respect in Confucianism. There are certain people that you bow with your heads to the ground to. Sometimes it's called kowtowing. You've ever heard that term, kowtowing? That's what that means, bowing with your head to the ground. You do that for the emperor, and you do that for your parents. And it's also a part of traditional Chinese weddings. When in a traditional Chinese wedding, the couple will bow with their heads to the ground both to the woman's parents and the man's parents, right? So there's Confucianism there. Daoism, you're going to see middle towards the end of the video, you're going to see the family members have set up tables with offerings, with food and things for their loved ones, right? So the question is, does that work? From a Buddhist point of view, does that work to send them food? Or is that a contradiction? It makes sense to them. It absolutely makes sense to them. It all works together. In another sect of Buddhism in another part of the world, it might not make sense. But in Chinese religion, you send food and money to your ancestors, whether it's Buddhist, Taoist, or anything else. You also see them burning incense, right? In Taoism, there's that idea that if you burn incense, it helps send your prayers send your prayers to your loved ones. So at the bottom here, I've put ash internment under all three categories because I'm not really sure about that tradition. This particular tradition where they take the ashes and they put them in the wall, that to me seems very, very Chinese. The Chinese are very fond of picking specific burial grounds or specific grounds to put their loved ones for funerals. And they're usually far away from the city. And that's part of kind of this idea, part of a kind of a Taoist idea of purity, right? But it's also a place where you can, it's away from the city, but you can put all of your family members together, just as we would in the West. You put burial plots one next to another so you can visit them all at once, right? So there's kind of a Taoist idea there where they take the ashes and they put them somewhere else. But they're all together, so you can visit all your family at once, but it's an ash internment specifically, which means they're cremated because they're Buddhist. And this is Asian religion. It all mixes together, and the boundaries blend completely. It's one of the reasons why it's so fascinating to study. I think you're going to enjoy watching this little video. It's only like 3 minutes, but underneath it, it has a text, a transcript that the man says for you to study. So look for these 3 traditions in this one ceremony, and ask yourself, would these Chinese Buddhists recognize that something that they're doing is Taoist? Probably. If you said that to them, if this seems Taoist, they would say, yeah, we're Chinese. To them, Daoism and Confucianism are synonymous. They're the same thing as being Chinese. So even though you adopt a new religion, even though a country adopts a new religion, doesn't mean you give up your old. So watch that video. Feel free to look through some of these pictures and look at all the different elements of the different religions.